A theoretical orientation called internal family systems has been gaining popularity in recent years and for good reasons. IFS is a very powerful system for helping your clients make peace with themselves, develop resilience, self compassion, heal, and grow. And I could not be more thrilled on this edition of Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists to have the opportunity to interview its founder, Dr. Richard Schwartz, on the model that you've developed. So we could talk about what it is, how it works, how it is different from other forms of therapy, and what a therapist not yet familiar with this modality should know. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Schwartz.
Great to be with you again. Please call me Dick, by the way.
Okay. I will call you Dick, but you have to call me Lisa. My friends call me Lisa.
Okay.
Okay.
Simpler. Yeah, sure.
So now we're friends. I love it. Just to begin, I think that by now, most professional therapists are at least somewhat familiar with internal family systems, if they've heard of it at least. But perhaps not all of them have had the benefit of doing one of your professional training programs and really doing a deep dive into what it is, how it works. And so I guess maybe we could start by you just explaining just your model in general and maybe some of the similarities, but also differences than that with some more traditional models of psychotherapy that people might be more familiar with.
Sure. So like some other models, believe that people have these different subpersonalities inside that I call parts. And yeah, Jung saw that and Freud had his take on it. And
And
then there are even things like schema therapies from cognitive behavioral and so on. And even closer are things like voice dialogue, some people probably have heard of. Or what's unique, I think, about IFS is a couple things. One is my background as a systems thinker from family therapy helped me organize this system in a way that makes it a lot more accessible than some other systems. And
mm,
also what I'm going to call self-leadership side of it, that there is, in addition to these parts, there's another place in you that when accessed can become a really good internal leader.
mm,
Or people call it like attachment theory taken inside, in the sense that you become the good attachment figure to your own avoidedly or
mm,
insecurely attached parts. That's different from many psychotherapies, and particularly depth psychotherapies, where you, the therapist, become that good attachment figure. So in a sense, it's easier on therapists. Now, your relationship with the client is still very important, but important in a different way, because the degree to which I can be in those, what we call 8C words, 8C qualities of self leadership with my client, then their what we call protective parts can sense the safety of my presence. And those protectors, or other systems call them defenses, start to relax more and more. And then they can access this state of self from them. And then once I get them into self, then I can have them begin to become this good leader and show a lot of compassion to parts that they had been hating for the most of their lives. And yet those parts aren't what they seem, that they actually desperately trying to protect them and are frozen in time in the past when they got these roles, but they don't realize that you're not in that kind of danger now, and they don't have to do these jobs. So just helping them reorient and begin to trust you as a leader, a self, is it's a big step. And
mm,
so that work is really helping people access those C-word qualities of calm, curiosity, confidence, and compassion. And then as you're in that state, and there are 4 other C words, but once you're in that state, having you become the interviewer and then ultimately the kind of good parent to these parts.
yeah. So interesting. And so Very broad strokes. So the model is that there's this core central self that is healthy, that is good, that cannot be damaged, and that it is possible to develop this central part of yourself, develop its leadership qualities, that kind of internal parent, internal attachment figure. And that according to your model, that the reasons why people feel bad, struggle in life and relationships, or engage in maybe behaviors that may feel or seem maladaptive on the surface is because these have developed over time in response to adverse life experiences, and that these parts are all functional and that they really need to be reclaimed with compassion. And that if I you look like you're about to say something.
Just, yeah, that's all accurate. The only quibble I would have is the word "boa," because turns out you don't have to develop self. It's just there. So
Yeah.
it's more uncovering it or unblending parts, and then it
Yes.
comes out fully developed. Yeah.
That's amazing. But and that part of the key role of being a therapist and using this modality is always being a temporary attachment figure. That is a lot of what we do with more traditional therapy, that relationship that supports the emergence of that central self that then really can do the work of working with those different parts, just with the right support. Is that it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I can, as a therapist in self, my self is contagious and it'll pull for the client self. And like I was
Mhm.
saying, the same my presence pulls for it as well. And then once you get what we call the critical mass of self, that's a big invitation for parts that had been locked away, what we call
Mm,
exiles, to
interesting.
come and get witness, because most of these parts that we left in the dust back when they got hurt don't feel like you ever get what happened and how bad it was. Really, you know that. And so all these other protective parts that have been keeping them locked away try to keep you from that awareness even, and try to minimize what happened. And so just getting to the point where you're willing to go to these painful places and let them know not only do you care and apologize even for locking them up, but that you really want to help them and you really want to get them out of where they're stuck back there. You really help them unload what we call the burdens they carry. These events that when you were ashamed as a child, you took in that burden of worthlessness
Mhm.
or sense of being shameful.
Yeah.
And and then you locked away that part that felt so ashamed because it made it hard to function in the outside world.
Yeah.
So we're actually going to these outliers and bringing them back home and helping them heal.
That is amazing. And also, as you're talking about this, and I'm thinking, as a therapist, this is deep work. And I would imagine, I don't know, let me ask you. I would imagine that it takes a lot of attunement and that it can be a fairly slow process, even to get people to trust you enough in order to move into some of these spaces. And then I would also wonder if there can be self of therapist issues that start coming up. And I just ask because I know that you've trained a ton of therapists in this modality, but thinking of therapists who maybe have their own unfinished business with some of these parts, if it can be personally challenging to enter into some of these spaces with clients who need to do this work when perhaps you have wounds in some of the same spaces. Have you found that to be true?
Totally, Lisa. That's very insightful. And go back to your first point.
I know that was like
About,
5 questions.
uh, you know, oh, how long it takes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot depends on number one, how much self I, the therapist, do bring. And then number two, how much trauma and how many people have betrayed the client in the past and have little trust in people.
Yeah,
And for some clients, it's been a year before we could go anywhere near their exiles. And
totally. I could see that.
I I had to earn the trust of these protectors. But there are other clients where, because I bring a lot of self, their protectors open space right away, and we can go down and do a lot of healing right pretty quickly. Regarding this question, it's crucial IFS therapists do their own work, because you're right. If your client goes to a place and gets very emotional and it triggers that exile in you and you're afraid of that exile, then you're going to find some way to distract and
Right.
interfere with your client's process, even if it's not overt. They'll just sense the shift in your energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can open clients to places that you can go yourself. And so a lot of our training programs are all about helping therapists learn about their own systems and to do their own healing.
That's amazing. I love that because in my experience, so many trainings or modalities, it's what we do with clients. And so here are the steps or the methods. But you're saying that IFS training for therapists really involves the experiential process of doing this work yourself in order to not just understand how it works on a deep level, I would think, but also prepare yourself to be the kind of partner that can go into these deep places with clients without becoming reactive and shutting it down, even just like energetically.
Exactly right. So our trainings, we have a 3-to-1 ratio between students and
Wow.
so that people break into groups of 3 and practice on each other with supervision. And that's served proven to be really useful. And we can make a lot more money if we could take 50 people without any assistance. But you were talking earlier about how this is all very delicate, and especially with highly traumatized clients. I learned the hard way that you can do damage. Back before I learned to go at the pace of these protective parts, who we have a lot of respect for, but don't want you going into those or our basements in there and mucking
Mhm.
around.
Yeah.
So we generally, before we go to these really raw places, will ask to work with the parts that are afraid to let us do that and go over all their fears about opening that door. And now we have ways to address all those fears, but we won't go without permission. So that's an important safeguard.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I want to ask you a question, but I'm not sure if this is an okay question to ask. I'll ask it maybe, and you're just like, no. I guess I would be curious to hear of a story that either you've experienced or that you've seen other therapists that you have worked with who are maybe not fully attuned to all of the parts, or maybe trying to move too fast or not getting consent, and it doesn't work for clients. Or you just mentioned I've had a bad experience or two. What does that look like?
Look in range. Back before I knew to be respectful of protectors, client
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
there's this pain in my gut. It's emotional pain. And I'd say, okay, let's go right there. And we'd succeeded the session. But I had clients after a session get into a car accident. They just car, for example, or sparked a big
Interesting.
fire, or minimally have a kind of critic attack them afterwards for having been so vulnerable, or worse, just tell them what terrible people they are and get them to not come back to my sessions.
Yeah.
It was through those kinds of experiences that I, at first I got very discouraged and thought, oh, this is too dangerous. But then I got curious, and I was lucky to have some clients that stuck around, and I would go and ask, what am I doing wrong? And we would hear from the protectors that felt like we were just bypassing them. They spent decades trying to keep this all contained. And here we just barge in and rip open the door. And And so we've learned now to do it when they're ready.
Yeah.
And for them to be ready, we have to prove that we know what we're doing, and we're not gonna go in and just muck around. We're actually
Yeah.
going in. Yes, it'll be painful,
Mhm.
hurry.
Right.
And once we get the part out of there, we can unload a lot of the pain. And then the protector won't have to do this protective job. It can do something entirely different. So I've become what I call a hope merchant. I'm selling hope to these parts that feel it's totally hopeless, so there's no point.
Yeah. Yeah, they have to trust you enough to let you in and open the door. Okay, sorry, I have all these questions crowding over. What do you make of some of the things you've experienced, like car accidents or people getting a fever? There's like a physical manifestation of this protective response. What do you make of that? The physical piece.
Oh, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but parts have a lot of ages.
Uh-huh.
Mm. They can take over, like you said, and make us do things we don't want to do. Go get drunk, and they can also make us blind to a car that might be in our way. Or, yeah, it's amazing the kind of power they have if they want to prevent you from doing something or make you do something.
Oh, and I just try to wrap my mind around this a little bit. What's the most extreme example of that you've ever seen?
My personal caseload, you mean, or
Or a story that you've heard from another therapist that I'm just curious. Parts
um,
taking control over somebody's life.
well, I've been fortunate to never have anybody suicide on my
Oh,
watch. I've had clients, and again, this was back before I knew how to do it right, highly suicidal after a session. And then I would have to bring in and talk to the suicidal part, which, again, this is a very different approach to suicide. For example, if you came in and you were in the suicidal part, I'd say, there's a aspect of IFS where we talk to parts directly. But
mhm.
I would say to suicidal part, because often it would take a long time to get you to not be afraid of it. You're wanting to kill Lisa, is that right? Yeah, that's right.
I see.
What are you afraid would happen if you didn't kill her? Because she'll continue to suffer this way. I can't stand it. She's been in this kind of pain for most of her life, and it's just too much. If we could get her out of her pain in a different way, would you have to kill her? And these parts will always say, no, but I don't think you can do that. Would you give me permission to prove that I can? Because if you do give me permission, I promise that we can get her out of that pain a different way. And then you won't have to be the suicidal part. You can do something else. So it's that kind of thing. So
It's amazing. You're like
yeah,
really,
there's a hierarchy of these, what we call firefighter parts. And some of them do the dissociating, some of them do the rage, some of them do with the drugs and alcohol, just to get you away from these exile parts.
mm,
Up in the hierarchy for most people is suicide.
yeah,
A big comfort to know if things get hot enough, there's this exit strategy.
yeah. Wow. But you're really like going in and joining these various personalities and let's work together to help Lisa. That's incredible. Are there some clients for whom you have found this approach to be difficult? Because in addition to just and this is going deep and it is emotionally intense work, like we're going all the way to the core. But above and beyond that, I would imagine that it requires the ability for people to go into the imagination room with you and really like this self concept. And it might feel for some people, at least at the beginning, like pretending that there are these different parts because they haven't really thought about themselves in that way before. Do you have some people just reject the idea of this? I see.
Yeah. I lived in Boston for 10 years, and people there are in their heads all the time. So I got a lot of intellectuals coming in and say, what do you mean parts? And I'm just me. And I'd say, let's just try it as a game or
Yeah.
for a while.
Uh-huh.
Or I would coach them. I know they were working with their parts.
Mhm.
There was this intellectual part saying all the time, you're making this up. This isn't real.
Yeah.
And then we'd have to ultimately work with that part to just give us a chance. Luckily, I have outcome studies to show them that this actually does work. Whether or not you think it's real, give us a chance. We can do some work here.
Wow. Then they leave your office weeping one day and you're like, yes. No, just kidding. Let's go into some of that outcome research though, because I am curious about that. And so take us into this. I'm curious to know just like what kinds of studies have been done with the populations. What did you find? And I'm sure that there's a lot there, broad strokes.
Wow. And people can find a list of all those studies on our website,
Perfect.
ifs-institute.com. But
Mhm.
just some of the highlights, we did an outcome study at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston with rheumatoid arthritis. And we had our control group and had really impressive results. And it's published in the Journal of Rheumatology, so a good scientific journal. And then we've done outcome studies with PTSD, for example, and there's one in motion now with alcoholism, and there's people doing IFS and psychedelics,
Mhm.
end of life experiences.
Interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, they can go on the website and see the study.
Okay. But generally speaking, are you finding evidence that supports this modality as being like, yes, when we do this, it helps people in XYZ ways?
Yeah, very much. I mean, you aren't all with control groups. It's hard to people
Mhm.
do get better.
Oh, that has to make you feel so good personally. I know we were chatting that you've started thinking about this 40 years ago from your own work, helping people, family therapists, working with people who are struggling with eating disorders. And if you'd like to tell a bit of your origin story, but I'm just thinking like to see your life's work come to fruition in this way and to have had the opportunity to train so many other therapists in this modality and see it do so much good for people. That's got to be amazing.
It is. It's a long time coming. Like you said, I've been at this 40 years and
Mhm.
a lot was in relative obscurity, but
Mm.
uh, oh, it's a bit of a dream come true now to have it become so popular and into the culture too. So that's very exciting. My biggest ambition is for it to replace the cultural paradigm about the brain and the mind
Ah,
and to really become a new way of understanding human nature and the way to relate to these different parts of us.
yeah.
If that happened, it would just, we do have programs now bringing it to schools and
Hmm.
arch- learning when you get bullied, you go to the one who get hurt and bring it to you. You don't just try and move on and lock it away. You get teachers be able to use the language and work with their own parts. And so there are a lot of ambitions, I guess is the word,
Yeah.
for bringing it not just to therapy, but also
Yeah.
to larger systems. And so this is a bit of a dream come true, but there's larger dreams actually.
Yeah. That is so incredible that just for a long time, I would just say toiled in obscurity and then gaining traction and certainly in therapist circles and becoming more utilized, but you're beginning to see it take on a life in the culture and to have this framework, these ideas in the air of just part of how people understand themselves and each other more broadly. What do you imagine would be different in the world if people were experiencing themselves and other people through what is objectively a very compassionate framework?
Not only compassionate, but yeah, it's also uplifting
Mhm.
because if I know that your essence is this pure goodness with these seaward qualities, and I can access that in myself, then we're going to connect at that level. And if I get into conflict with you, I'm going to pause, give my protectors to step back, come back, the words in my body, and relate to you in a different way. And we've seen this where there's a whole couples
Mm.
program called Intimacy from the Inside Out with IFS. And you see this all the time with couples that's simply getting them to come back to this place of self. They have a totally different conversation. And we're certain that's true with conflict resolution at all kinds of different levels. And there are people now bringing it to world conflicts. So that's really ambitious, but I never thought I'd get this far. So
Why not? That would be just so amazing. And giving people a framework to relate to each other in a different way and really, I think, see and I'll expect the good in others. And so that when people do behave badly or these parts become activated and do something weird, like there's a different framework for understanding that as opposed to being angry and judgmental and rejecting. It's, oh, tell me what's coming up for you. Yeah, that's incredible. And,
The other concept we touched on, yeah, we call it
oh,
legacy
oh,
hub. So that there are, so far we've talked about what we call personal burdens that came from your direct experience in your life, emotions you took in. But we also inherit these extreme beliefs and emotions from our ancestors
mm,
or from the group or just from living in this culture.
mm,
It's possible to find those parts that carry those legacy burdens and actually send those out so that you no longer, just a real quick example, I was called to put a statement to the community about Israel and Gaza and
mm,
ceasefire and return of the hostages. And a lot of my Israeli trainers and other American Jews were inflamed by that. And one woman in particular was hating me but happened to be level 2 trainee and did a piece of work in that training where she found the Holocaust legacy burden, all of her view of me and also of Palestinians
yeah,
and the simple act of sending that out totally transformed the way she sees me now. And she says, now I can't other people in the way I used to be able to.
mm,
And I've got all that on video. And so that gives me hope that we could do some collective legacy unburdening, which
right.
that's where I'm heading, that it could actually make a big difference.
Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that when people haven't done that work, they will have legacy burdens that maybe they're not even aware of, but would obscure their ability to really see you in your essential self and the good and the noble intentions. It's like it impacts their view of other people. And so to let these go helps us just reconnect soul to soul in some ways.
That's
If
exactly
it,
right. And
yeah.
because most of the time we've had these legacy burdens from birth, we're just
Mhm.
aware that they're extreme and
Yeah.
the fish has to know about water. So
Mm.
it's what we're swimming in. And so we just think that's the way the world is. So
Right.
people separate from and then unload these things is a big change.
It's incredible. And while we're here on this subject, and just for our therapist friends to know, I had the best time, you guys, this morning personally, working through Dr. Schwartz's new workbook that you recently put out for clients. It's the Internal Family Systems Workbook, and you laid out some of your principles, obviously not the big guns, but the stuff that is accessible and helpful for people to do on their own. And you have a number of exercises that I worked through in here, but one of them was the legacy work, the things that you inherited from your family that could maybe or cultural experiences. But then you also had a section in there called heirlooms, which I really appreciated, which what are the gifts that you were also given from the culture, the history. And I found this to be so helpful, but just wanted to make therapists listening to this aware of this resource that they could put in front of their clients, even just to support the work that they're doing in therapy and that some of these exercises exist. So I thought that was great. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that is our first foray into doing this directly to the public rather than going through therapists.
Mhm.
All was useful.
Certainly. I loved it. But I also know that you have put so much energy into training therapists. And just before we wrap up, so for therapists listening to this and being like, wow, this sounds amazing. Where do I learn more? Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in terms of therapist education these days and how somebody might get involved with that? Is it an in person thing? Is it online? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Again, the website is ifs-institute.com, and
Hmm.
on there, you'll see all of our training program selections. You have level 1, level 2, level 3 trainings, and some of them are on, like everybody, with COVID, we went online.
Hmm.
Now we have a kind of hybrid. So we have some programs that are still just online, other programs just in person, and some a combination. And we also, for a long time, our programs were very hard to get into because of the demand. And we've grown the number of programs to the point where now, just to reassure people that have had trouble, it's much easier to get into. And that in the meantime, we have a program called the Online Circle program where you get most of the basic concepts and the techniques, just you don't get the same level of supervised practice and the other trainings.
Yeah.
That me too.
And would you recommend that as in addition to the training and the experience, that it's a good idea for a therapist to have an IFS specific clinical supervisor to support their development in this work?
Yeah, people want to really get seriously good
Mhm.
at it.
Yeah.
Does seem supervision do have a certification process and
Mhm.
requires a level of training and then some number of hours of supervision and then even submitting a for review to make sure we know what you're doing. And
Yeah.
I come from a very medical family, and so first do no harm is a big motto in my family.
Mhm. Yeah.
Why our trainings are so intensive.
Abs- Okay, then before I let you go, speak to that a little bit because I too feel that it is very important for practitioners to become educated and trained because I think it can be easy for a clinician to read a book, hear a podcast, think, oh, that sounds cool. I should start getting parts of my clients to talk to each other in our sessions. And you just said do no harm. I'm wondering what you would see as the risks or cautionary tales of a therapist to start messing around with some of this without really having done the work, gone through the trainings, done this work themselves. What do you see?
We've touched on some of that. You and I were just talking about as you work with clients' parts and they trigger parts of you,
Uh-huh.
it's hard to stay in self. And if your protectors come forward as a therapist, it's your client's going to sense that they're going to lose minimally, they're going to lose trust in you.
Yeah.
Maximally, they're going to polarize with your protectors and you're up to the rip. And then also, especially with highly traumatized clients, opening the door to these exile parts, there's sometimes a lot of reactions that if you don't, like if I had you go to one of your exiles and suddenly you have a panic attack, easy for you to get scared if you think of it as a panic attack. But if you think just as this terrified little part that's come forward who's blended with you, then you're going to be much calmer about it. Going to help the client start to help the part rather than be overwhelmed by it.
Right.
But so there's lots of those kind of things. And,
Right.
for me, the DSM is a fairly accurate description of clusters of protective parts, but that's all it is. Not
Interesting.
it's not pathology. It's just different symptoms are caused by different protectors.
It's amazing, but good idea that this is a comprehensive system. There are complexities, there is nuance. And so, if you're interested in practicing IFS, become educated, become competent so that you can be a trustworthy partner for people who are trusting you to be that for them. I love that message. Is there anything else that you would like a clinician to know about IFS or you, or where you see this all going? What would you like to end on?
I guess just to say that it's a incredibly great way to spend an hour
Yeah, I bet.
because you don't have to figure out how to solve their problems. You're helping them go inside, and especially when you access enough self, they take over the session and you're
Mm.
just witnessing this amazing process that they're doing with themselves and tweaking it here and there. But experience of being in these extremely vulnerable places with people and feeling their trust in you, and that you can be present. You can really be present without constantly worrying about coming up with a solution for them. It's just very rewarding to a way to do therapy.
No, no, I could see that. You're a facilitator. It's like some kind of doula, as opposed to being the one that make it happen. They're just facilitating the process of healing in them. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, and people go on these incredible journeys inside that often can become quite spiritual. All of that is just very rewarding.
Yeah. That's honestly one of my main takeaways from this conversation and just spending time with you today is that this is a transcendent modality. There are spiritual dimensions of this that are just so interesting to me. And I personally can't wait to explore further and do a deeper dive into all of this. Oh,
I really enjoy that.
thank you so much for doing this with me. This was a great conversation. I learned a lot. I've already personally benefited from your amazing workbook, and I'm so grateful for you to share your wisdom and your perspective with other therapists. Thank you.
You're so welcome.